Aloha and welcome to Live at the Legislature. I'm Jill Kuramoto. Every week we sit down with Hawaii senators to talk about the events and the issues that are happening within this legislative session. And this morning we're joined by Senate Majority Leader Senator J. Kalani English. Senator English represents District 7, which encompasses Hana, East and Upcountry Maui, Molokai, Lanai, and Kaho'olawe. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So we are now down to our final days of this legislative session. I'm curious to know, what are your takeaways from this session?
Well, I think we've had a very good session. And I'll say an orderly session, a session where a lot of controversial bills got heard in a civil fashion. And we passed some really big bills. Our Choice, Our Care, Our Choice, which is the Death with Dignity bill. Yeah, and that's been around since the late 90s. And I remember we had very controversial hearings back then, all the way through now. And this time, remember the Senate passed it last year. We sent it to the House. The House chose not to pass it then. Then the House passed another bill this year. They sent it over to us, and since we already voted on it once, we voted on it again and passed the bill. So we put that bill into law, and it went up to the governor, and he signed it. We also did things like the pesticide buffer zones,
right, that was
which has been a long debate.
Right, a lot of families have been protesting against that.
Right, especially in my district, it's a big issue. Especially for those living around schools. But we had to really carefully craft this bill, because if we did it wrong, we would also make, for instance, tenting of homes for termites that are in the buffer zone illegal. So we had to craft it very carefully so that they could do that.
And Hawaii now is the first state in the nation to ban, I don't even know how to pronounce the pesticide.
Yes. I can't pronounce it either. So yes, we banned that certain pesticide. And actually, it's a phased out use over time. And then we also did the oxybenzone ban, or the sunscreen ban. And this has been one that's been in the works for a while. Again, very important because it affects our coral reefs, but we also had to balance those people with skin cancer and with other types of ailments that need sunscreens. What we understand is that they're reformulating the big companies that create the base ingredients are before the FDA, asking for a reformulation that takes out these substances from the sunscreen. So, hopefully in about 2 to 3 years, they'll be able to have a new product without these things. In the meantime, it is banned. We also did, of course, we did a study on family leave, paid family leave, which is a big issue, something that a lot of people want, but we have to balance it very carefully. So we've asked for more study on that, and asking that we look at the issue more closely for action next session.
And then the CONAM.
Yeah, the constitutional amendment. So the constitutional amendment passed. It'll be placed on the ballot this election, and it'll be asking the voters, shall we have a surcharge on property taxes to pay for education? So, the HSTA really wants this bill. Advocates for education really think it's a good bill. But it depends how this is applied. So the question will go to the voters. If it is approved, then the next legislative session will have to figure out how to implement it, which means, the original Senate position, of course, was that we, for properties valued less than $1 million, that this wouldn't apply to. We had some other safeguards built in there. The House wanted to go with a different route. We agreed with that. Just to get the question on the ballot, and then after that we'll see how it goes. So if it passes, we will take this up next year.
Right. Okay. Well, I know that you're particularly proud of the number of bills and the types of bills that align with the Senate Majority's legislative program.
Yes, our program dealt with the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And really what it did was it placed a lot of these types of issues in a global context. It allowed us to look at the matrix that the rest of the world is being graded on. And it also allowed us to look at how we're going to holistically, as a whole, move government ahead and move people ahead so that we reduce our consumption, we become better stewards of the land and of the ocean, and we take into account more sustainable practices. So, I'm very proud that the Senate was able to put this together and then put our bills in this context so that we can have really good outcomes, and we can look at how we can measure these in the future. So I think we're quite successful with doing this, and many of the environmental bills, for example, that we did fall squarely within this. Of course, we're dealing with sea level rise, and we're dealing with climate change as the storms on Kauai, the storms on Oahu, the storms on Maui, and future storms will show. So we're looking at things like reinsurance. How do we ensure that we have a rapid response to massive destruction? And the big question that we're all dealing with is called managed retreat. How do we start moving things away from the shoreline, infrastructure, roads, things like that, schools, so that we're less in the way of in harm's way.
Right. And then this is also requiring some long-term thinking too,
yes.
ahead of time.
Yeah.
Are you going to be approving plans that are be built
Well,
on
exactly.
the shoreline, things like that, right?
Exactly. In fact, for example, we opened the Lahaina bypass in Maui, and that moves the highway inland. When they complete the entire bypass, the whole highway should be moved in, which would, ensure access from that side of the island to the central part to the airport. But if we don't start doing this now, we will have highways falling into the ocean, as you can see on Maui. Other islands, you can see it. On Oahu, certainly you can see on the other side of this island where this is happening. So we have to plan for this now.
And it's a different way of thinking. It's a paradigm shift on how you plan, how you think, how you...
Right, and it's happening at all levels. So, the Land Use Commission, for example, they're rewriting their rules, and they're in the process of redoing how they look at land entitlements and land use. We've had to think about things like what happens when a structure becomes inundated. That means it goes into the ocean. Because under current law, it becomes government property. So who is responsible for removing the structure? Who is responsible for the debris? How do we deal with property taxes and landowners that have structures that will become inundated? The Climate Change Commission that we created 2 years ago actually has if you go to their website, has a map showing all of the TMKs, the parcels along the ocean, and an approximate inundation period. So you can go and look at your property and say, well, okay, within 20 years we'll be inundated, or within 15 years we should have water coming into our property.
All right, lots to think about. Very engaging conversation. Thank you very much, Senator. And thank you for watching Live at the Legislature. We'll see you next week.